Hello, this is Kimberly Harris with the Quilt of the Block Month Club with Lickety Stitch Quilts, and this month is block 3 and it's called Homespun. As always, the pattern instructions are included in your kit, and I have some alternative suggestions for ways to maybe cut fewer pieces and get there a little bit easier. This video is going to talk about the alternative cutting and piecing methods. So let's just go through real quick what we've got. So for this block, the center block, block A, is 4.5 inches square, and we're gonna cut it just like that. So one piece at 4.5 inches square. And then if you look at blocks B and C, and I'm trying to see, so here, you'll see that they make kind of flying geese units. And so we're going to use those blocks and make flying geese. And of course, my preferred method of flying geese units is to do the 4 at a time no waste method. So from fabric B, I cut one 5 1/2 inch square, and I'm actually going to use white for my flying geese middles. So I have one 5.5 inch square and 4 of fabric C, 3 1/4 inch squares. So one 5.5 inch goose body and 4 3 1/4 inch wing pieces. And then also blocks D and the background fabric make a flying goose method or block. And the background fabric is fabric H in your instructions. So for those two, I cut one fabric D. I'm going to use the white again. So I cut one white 5 1/2 inch square, and then 4 of my background, which for this quilt is going to be a green, or for this quilt block, at least for me anyway, at 3 1/4 inches. So as always, on the right hand side of the paper as you're looking at it, there is a blank row where she gives you space to write in your own colors. I used it to write in my cutting sizes, but as long as you're kind of following the diagram with light and dark, if you're not following her specific colorway, you can match your colors. If you're worried about getting them confused, you can write them over here. And you can also use sticky notes and label your fabric so that as you're going, you don't swap one color for the other, which is something interesting I learned this week on another quilt, trying to keep the fabric straight. So after you've got your flying goose units cut, the next fabric is E and background. So the next units are these little half square triangle units, and they make half square triangle units. Goodness, Kimberly. So to do that, my preferred method is the 4 at a time, stitch all around the edges. So from E, and then if you look at fabric F, you'll see that there are 2 of the same color. So I followed that. So I cut one of fabric E, 2 fabric F, and 1 fabric G, 4.5 inch squares. And then to go with that, I cut 4 4.5 inch squares from the background fabric. I got some good feedback at class this week, and I'm going to be sending along with the video a alternative cutting instruction sheet and then step by step with pictures, so that you have that along with the video to follow along if you'd like. So I'm going to pause while we cut out our fabrics, and I will be right back. Okay, so I've got my 5.5 inch flying goose body square, and then I have 3 1/4 inch flying goose wings. And again, you can draw lines on the back. I press mine in half so that I have a good line. And we are just going to use that fast flying goose method where I'm going to lay that corner to corner And then I'm going to lay another one right on top of it in the opposite corner so that my diagonal line is going to form a diagonal all the way down the body of my big square. I'm going to take 2 pins and just pin those in place because I get a little grouchy with my fabric when it shifts. And then I'm going to go to my machine and I'm going to sew right down the middle, or I'm sorry, excuse me, a 1/4 inch from each side of the middle, right down that. So I'm going to do both of my flying geese blocks at the same time, and I used white again for my B and D fabric. So your other 5.5 inch block, and then your background fabric, your 4.5 inch, 3.25 inch flying goose wing squares. I am so sorry. And we're going to line them up again, and sew a 1/4 inch right down the middle. So it's going to look like this. It looks weird. It'll be okay. This is just the first step. So I'm going to pause and sew both of those, and we'll come back and cut them open and place the other pieces. Alrighty, so figured out what the line in the camera is and took care of that. Sorry about that. So here I have sewn a 1/4 inch off of the center on each side, and I've done that for both sets of my flying geese. So this bright green is the background for me in this block. And these are right sides together. This is a batik. Please don't, if you're using right-sided fabric, it's right sides to right sides. The batik has 2 right sides. So I'm going to make a plug for stopping and checking your seam allowance at this point. I will, in full disclosure, show you my will not be used in a quilt block, because I didn't check my seam allowance, and I stopped and started and came back a couple times, and because I didn't check my seam allowance, I have some really wonky joins and really missed corners, like, wow, you missed that corner. So this is my everything serves a purpose, even if only to be a bad example, block there. So I'm going to stop and check my seam allowances, and I'm just going to go and grab my ruler and set it right alongside that diagonal and make sure that I am sewing a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch. Even if you have a 1/4 inch foot, it's a good idea to do this every once in a while, especially when you have a lot of points and half square triangles and flying geese units, because things can shift ever so slightly. I don't have a 1/4 inch foot at this time. I, to be quite honest, lost it when I moved and haven't found it still a year later. So I adjust my needle position, and so I check that quite often. But make sure you're checking it. It's easy to do, and you will be much happier with your results. So we are going to cut these down the middle, and that's like sounds super hard, right? We're going to cut right on that diagonal line, right down the middle. Grab my rotary cutter and split them open. May as well do that for both. So then we will press, I can do that while we're watching, these open so they look like little hearts. They're flying geese that love you. And gently pressing, not ironing, certainly not digging at it. Be nice to your fabric. Again, something I realized I was doing about a month or so ago. And if you can see your sew lines, you're pushing too hard on your iron. So we are just going to do that with all of the blocks. We're going to open them up like hearts, and then we will take our other pieces. Again, this is a batik, so both sides are right sides, but right sides together, and line them up corner to the sides. Your top corner will peek out the top. I am going to take a pin and just secure that, and then I'm going to do that for all of my flying goose units. And we are going to sew right up the 1/4 inch off of the middle, right up the centers a 1/4 inch off of that fold line or marked line, or if you have one of those happy little tape things on your machines that helps you hit that line, do a 1/4 inch down both sides. We'll come back and open them up and look at our pretty flying geese. Alrighty, so we've sewn a 1/4 inch from the center line on all of our little flying geese units. So we are going to open those up. And we'll just do one. So I'm going to cut right down the center again. Ooch, that didn't quite work. There we go. And press those open. So those are going to give us our nice flying geese, and we are going to trim those up to 4.5 by 2.5. And I just want to walk through that real quick. Okay, so I changed the camera angle just a bit for trimming up so that we can see all of it. So I've got my flying goose, and of course the camera reverses everything. So this is pointing to my left hand. And I am going to take any ruler with a diagonal line in inch marks marked, and I'm going to set that ruler with the diagonal line along the diagonal of my flying goose. I know I want this to finish at 2.5 inches tall, so I'm going to set the very point of my flying goose unit into that 2.25 inch mark along my diagonal. And I'm going to make sure that the tip, the tip of my ruler on that diagonal line and the 4.5 inch mark on the other side also line up with the intersection of my flying goose and my background unit, because that's where I want it to stop. So once I get all of those things wiggled, and depending on your goose, my goose always wonky. I have disobedient geese. It's not something I'm proud of, but I quilt for me. So you may have to fudge it just a little bit, you know, a hair this way or that way. For me, my most important lines are making sure that my intersections here match my 0 and my 4.5, and that my point isn't extending beyond my 2.25. If that means that my point might be a little bit to the left or right of where I want it to be, I'm okay with that, because when you stand back and look at my quilt, what you're going to see is, did I hit the 1/4 inch here? And did I lose my point? Not, is that sitting exactly in the center? So I'm going to trim the bottom. And the other reason we make these a little bit oversized is so we have that room to trim and we don't lose our point and we get our 1.25 inches. And then I'm going to line this, I'm going to flip my mat. I rotated my mat. My goose is now pointing to my right. I'm going to line it up with my 2.5 inch mark on my ruler. My very point hits my 1/4 inch mark there because we lined that up, and I'm going to trim. Now, I can point my goose up or down. I like it down. And I'm going to line the middle of my goose up with my 2.25, and that should make it hit where my intersection of my goose and my background fabric should hit right along the edge, and it does. So I'm going to trim that. Ooch, I'm going to make sure that I'm straight first. All that careful, and we almost got wonky anyway. And then I'm going to rotate it, line that side up with my 4.5. We are happy with this goose. It is a good goose because this intersection lines up exactly here, and so we're going to trim. Sometimes we have slightly naughty goose. That doesn't mean we love them any less. It just means that they have to sit in timeout until we're not mad at them anymore. So we're going to do that once more. I'm going to point the goose to the left. I'm going to line the tippy point of my goose up along the diagonal of my ruler at 2 1/4 because I'm leaving myself a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm going to line that up at 2 1/4. I'm going to put the diagonal intersection here on the end of my ruler. I'm going to squish it just a little bit so that my 4 1/2 inch mark also hits where my two fabrics meet. I'm going to make sure everything looks good, and I'm going to cut off the bottom. And then I'll rotate it. I'm going to set that on the 2 1/2 inch line. Make sure that my goose, I still have my tip is hitting my 1/4 inch mark, and I'm going to trim the seam allowance there. I'm going to line it up here so that my tip is at my 2 1/2 inch point. Sorry, 2 1/4 inch point, 4 1/2 inch wide. And I line up in my corner here. I'm going to trim. And then I'm going to rotate one more time. 4 1/2 inches by 2 1/2 inches. Everybody's happy, and I'm going to trim that last side. I did a step-by-step on trimming these flying goose. I think it was a PDF file, and I sent it out with the last video we did. So that's there. I just wanted to go through this one more time on video. We'll probably do it each time, but so we're going to go ahead and finish making our flying geese and trimming them up and get that through. I'm not going to pause. Oh, I am going to pause. I'm going to pause and let you do that. We will come back and do our half square triangles. Okay, so all of our flying geese are set. We're going to work on our half square triangles. I'm going to leave the camera up here because it's a better camera angle, even though you can see more of my messy room. So I apologize for my messy space, and hope everybody else has a messy space too. So I'm not going to use that. That's my middle. So I have 4 of my background color 4 1/2 inch squares. And then I have 1 color E, which for me I chose to use the white again. I'm going to have 2 color F 4 1/2 inch squares and 1 color G 4 1/2 inch squares. And I love this method because it's super simple. You take your squares. We're going to sew around all 4 sides. And then we're going to open them up by chopping them in half twice. We're going to get some bias on the edges. For me, that's okay. Excuse me, I have the hiccups all of a sudden. I like bias on the edges because sometimes you gotta make a match in your quilt. I also starch my fabrics, and I'm super gentle with them so I don't get a lot of stretch. If you have a different method that you like to make half square triangles, by all means use it. This way is just fast, it's easy, and I like it. Because I like fast and easy, that's how I roll. So, starch your fabrics so they don't stretch, best press them, I don't know, lick them, however you do. Maybe you don't like starched fabrics. Totally your quilt. Let's make half square triangles. We'll come back and cut them open. Again, for this method, I'm just going to sew around all 4 sides. I don't even pick my needle up. I just keep rotating and sewing through. So I'm going to pause, let's do that, and we'll come back. Okay, so we've sewed around all 4 sides. We are just going to cut that in half twice. So we are going to lay it out. Sorry. I'm trying to figure out my best angle here. And slice it down the middle. And then slice it down the middle the other way. So we have 4 triangles that we are going to press open towards the back, or towards the background material is how I'm doing it because that's my darker. You might do it towards your colored material if your background is lighter. That's okay. As long as you do them all the same, you'll be fine. So we are going to cut open all of our half square triangles, you're going to end up with 416 of them amongst the different fabric combinations. And then we're just going to square these to 2.5 inches. And again, this weekend, we were sharing squaring methods. So I am going to show mine. And this is really close to me. There we go. Give me a little room to move. So I lay mine out with the diagonal up. I put my diagonal of my squaring ruler along the diagonal of my block. And I make sure, so this is going to be 2.5 inches. I make sure that I have fabric past the 2.5 inch mark on my ruler. And then I square both sides outside of my ruler. These are tiny little pieces. The point is to just give you a square edge that you are going to use when you rotate your block. Now you're going to line up those edges that you just cut along the 2.5 inch line and the 2.5 inch line. Your diagonal is still lined up, and square the rest of your edges. And then you have a square block with your diagonal that lines up. There are several different ways to square up blocks. This is the way I use. Again, it's fast, it gets good results, and I like it. So go ahead and square up all of your blocks, and we are going to come back together for assembly. Finish that one real quick. So, we had a little squaring up error, and instead of recutting and resewing right now, I want to go ahead and get to assembly with y'all. So I'm going to go back to a block that we started this weekend and I don't have all together yet. So my colors didn't magically transform. There's not fabric out there that's doing that and you just didn't know. That would have been hilarious though. Anyhow, so we're going to put this together. You have your center block, your 4.5 inch. I'm going to again advocate for laying out the block. Really tempted in this block to turn this and make stars. We're not making stars, we're making pokies. So we're going to put our pokies down, actually, our pokies down, and our goose points out. Our goose is pointing out, our goose is pointing out. Well, gee whiz. There we go. And then our other geese, our other geese, our other geese. Oh no, we're off the map. Other geese. Okie dokie. And I think I decided that I liked it this way. So we're just laying out our blocks. Oh, no, sorry. That's why we lay them out. To make sure that we have our placement correct. And just go through and make sure that all of your blocks are laid out. Everybody's where you want them. Everything's pointing the right way. Okay, so everybody's pointing the right way. Everything's where I want it. I'm going to sew this together. I'm going to sew together my goose or my half square triangle units into blocks of 4. And then I'm going to sew, sorry, I'm taking it apart for you. I would suggest leaving it laid out because it's really easy to get these pieces turned. I am going to sew these blocks into blocks of 4. So I'm going to sew 4 units. And I'm going to sew my flying geese together in stacks of 2. And stacks of 2, and stacks of 2. And then I will assemble those. So go ahead and sew together your corner 4 blocks and your your 2 goose units together into stacks, and we'll come back. Okay, so we have our corner square sewn. We have our flying goose units sewn. I don't know why I keep wanting to say half flying goose today. Maybe because there's two of them? I don't know. And we've got our blocks laid back out. So it's just a matter of putting them together. We're going to assemble the top line, the middle line, the bottom line, and then all three blocks. As far as pressing goes, for my flying geese, I always like to press up away from that tippy point. So on the square blocks, since the flying geese are pointing towards the outside of the block, on the corners I pointed towards the inside of the block so that they will nest. When I sew these together, I will press my middle row towards the inside block, which means I'll press my outside rows towards the outside block so those nest. So we're going to sew this row together and press towards the corner units. We're going to sew the middle row together and press towards the middle, and then the top row together and press towards the corner, and we'll come back. Okay, so we've got our strips sewn, and all that's left is to sew them together. We're going to put together our rows, and our block will be done for month 3. I'm going to pause. I will come back and show you my finished square. We'll chat a little bit about next month's class at Lickety Stitch, and we'll be done. Alrighty, we are all put together. We're all good. It needs a good squish, some starch in my world, to press it down, and we'll put it in our finished box. Thoughts about the bias edges on the half square triangles around the edges. If your block is being stored in a place where it's getting moved a lot, or maybe squished, or, you know, any kind of potential for those to stretch, you can, before you store it, set your stitch length to something really long, something like 3.5 or 4, and stitch around the edges. And that way, that won't be an issue with you as you continue to store your block throughout the year until we're done. Next month, our class in person at Lickety Stitch is on July 24th. We've been having some fun. It's sure nice to see folks and get to sit and sew on a Saturday. We are able to stay past the noon hour. We have talked a couple times about breaking and grabbing some lunch and then coming back. So if you come in for class next Saturday, we'll be working obviously on block 4, and I will send Karen to send out cutting instructions ahead of time. One of those great feedback points was it would be nice to have the pieces cut when we got there so we could spend our whole time sewing, which is totally fair, and I will get right on that. The other thing is, if you want to just come and stay and work on prior blocks, I'm happy to stay and work with you on blocks 1, 2, or 3 next month. Maybe you're running into some hiccups and we just need to talk it through. Maybe you want to bring something totally not block of the month related and just have a sit and sew on a Saturday. It's nice and cool in the shop, and the company sure is good. I've been enjoying it. So, for now, have a great time sewing, and we will chat with you soon. Thank you.